A beer flood, that's every boozer's dream, isn't it? But this one's got a little bit more to the story. Hello, I'm Keith Woodhouse, and this is one of my fireside chats without a fireside. Don't have a fire as it happens. And basically, what I'm going to do is just talk as if we're sitting there together in the pub and enjoying a pint. And this story's got a little bit more of a pint involved in it. It's totally unscripted, totally unedited, and so I'll just chat. I won't do any of the fancy bits where you get turnovers and that. Where I go wrong, I will just carry on, say it's warts and all. This story I saw some years ago, and I thought, that sounds brilliant. And then the more I found out about it, the more I thought, wow, this is something that really I've not heard about in history books or anything, and it was quite an event. It happened around about October 1814. And once again, I would check those dates before you get in a fight down the quiz in the local pub, because it may be that my sources or my memory is not as good as the books that they're referring to. It was in a place called the Horseshoe Brewery. Now, this was situated in the heart of London. Now it's in the heart of tourist London, theatre London, that area. It was actually on the joining of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street. Now, when I knew that area, and it's changed again immensely. I've not been up there since they put in Crossrail and demolished lots of things. But when I knew that area, there was just sort of like one pub. As far as I know, there was one pub in Oxford Street, and that was called the Tottenham, and that was down on that that end of Oxford Street where Tottenham Court Road meets it, where you got a centre point and the Tottenham Court Road tube station. Anyway, there was this brewery there, and it had been, the fella came from a brewing family. He decided to go out on his own, set up his own brewery in this area. Now, you think of that area now as being very expensive real estate, very expensive land. But in those days, it was a very, very impoverished area. And areas around there were known as the rookeries because the people were just crammed into rooms. They had no money. They were paid a pittance, and they were so poor that families upon families would cram into one room, and they would use every inch of space for living in these buildings, including the basements. So every floor would be full of rooms, and they'd have terrible sanitary conditions. But that's for another video. So the thing was that it was a very, very densely populated area, and a lot of the people that lived there, in fact, I would say the majority of people probably were living way, way below what we would call the poverty line nowadays. I think I may be right in saying that if you've ever seen those Hogarth prints of, there's a famous one of Gin Alley where someone's chucking a baby over the wall. You know, it looks as though they're killing a baby. And there's all sorts of horrific things going on with all these drunken people. And that was typical of the area if it was not based on that area. So you had a dense population of very poor people and industry around there. One of the industries was the brewery. Now, it was the Horseshoe Brewery, and they had these massive great vats. I mean, you think of brewing now with those big vats of beer that they have. Well, they had those in those days as well. And some of these was 10 feet high, and they held all sorts of amounts of liquid in them. And they were just wooden barrels, giant wooden barrels. That's all they were. They were giant wooden barrels, and they'd be fermenting away in there. And of course, if there's fermentation going on, there's a lot of bubbling and one thing and another. So there is movement with inside them. And there was a fella whose job it was to do the safety on the site, and he gone round during the day and looked at one of the vats and was a bit concerned about it. I think they had these great big metal rings around them to hold all the wood together. So I think one of those rings had actually moved, and he thought, "Oh, I'll have a look at that later on today," but did nothing about it at the time. Um, so he hasn't done his job for a start. You know, he's looked at that and thought, yeah, we'll do something a bit later about that. And then sometime during the day, I can't remember when it was, one of these vats, the one that was damaged, actually burst, and it burst out. Now, this I think was holding something like 1,000,000 litres of beer, 1,000,000 litres. Can you imagine it? You got those bottles about that big, you know, a million of them in this vat. So as that has exploded, basically, because it would have come out with a massive explosion, and it's damaged other vats that are around it, which were probably in a better condition, but it's damaged those, and they've burst as well. So you've got all of this beer suddenly flooding out. Now, my immediate thoughts were, as a lover of beer, I've been a beer drinker for as long as I can remember, and I love it. I drink all sorts. Really, real ale is my favourite, but I'll drink real ale. I drink Guinness. I'll drink lager. I love all types of beer. The only thing I don't like is keg beer, but apart from that, I love all types of beer. I drink it from bottles. I drink it on tap. I drink it from cans. I just love beer. So, but my immediate thoughts are beer flood, right? What would be the first thing that I do? The first thing that I do is I'll be going around buying as many buckets as I could carry, and then rushing down and scooping up the beer from the brewery that's coming down the road, and I'll be thinking, great, you know, and you scoop it off the top so it's not got dirty at the bottom, and rushing off home and having a party. But unfortunately, it didn't work like that, because you've got to realise that I didn't when I first thought of it. The pressure from this beer escaping was immense, and one of the first things it did was to demolish the wall of the brewery. Unfortunately, that wall was also the wall to the neighbouring pub, and there was a young girl who was working on that side of the pub, and the wall came down and killed her. So this has now turned from a funny jape where you would be rushing around scooping up pints of beer and watching it flood off down Oxford Street or Tottenham Court Road, to a situation where it's actually had its first fatality. And then the flood wall, the sort of like height of the beer coming down the road, I'm thinking of it sort of like just rushing down a foot or two high, and you're scooping a pint pot into it, picking it up, having a drink, and standing there with your mates watching it sort of like flow off down the road. The actual height of the flood, right, as it came out of that brewery, was 15 foot high. 15 foot. If you imagine the ceiling in the average house in the UK anyway, is around about 10 foot high. So it's the size of that and half again. So it's halfway up the second story of a typical UK house. So you imagine that coming down the road at you. You're not exactly rushing off to buy buckets after all, and you're not dipping your pint in it. You are getting out of the way fast. So this beer is coming out, it's flooding down the road, and drainage virtually non-existent. Virtually non-existent. There is nowhere for this beer to be drained away. It just goes into the houses, it crashes into buildings, it will crash into, I suppose there were horse and carts on the road. There will be people trying to get out of its way, and there it is, sort of like coming down. And as I understand it, there was a total of 8 people were killed in that. Ironically, some of them was attending a wake, and they were at a wake in a cellar nearby, and that cellar got flooded, and people were killed in that. So there were people of all ages. I mean, the girl was a teenager who was killed in the pub. There was infants killed, some of 3 years old, and there was older people killed in their 60s. So there was a various amount of people, and a wide age range of people that was actually killed in this incident. And more people would have been killed had the local population not got together and started digging people out of the wreckage. Because I assume that if they were stuck in wreckage, then it's possible that they could be drowning in it as well. So they were dug out of the wreckage. So what did the brewery do? The brewery was virtually demolished. Some of the building stood, but the inner workings of the brewery, the vats and things like that, totally gone. So the brewery, in its infinite wisdom, not even thinking, oh well, there's people being killed in this, what can we do for them? They turn it into a tourist attraction, right? They actually charge people. Can you imagine it? Charge people to come in and look around the damage that it had caused. It beggars belief. You think of it nowadays, when it happens, you get a disaster whereby, I'd say, a building has collapsed, and it will be fenced off. You wouldn't be allowed anywhere near it. But no, they're charging people to go in and have a look. Come and have a look at this. Then the people who have been killed were all poor people. As I understand it, they were all poor people. And of course, that meant their families were poor, and these people had to be buried. And what they did was they actually laid the bodies out in the street and then charged people to see the bodies. So you had tourists flocking in to see the damage done to the brewery and the bodies of the victims. It's unbelievable. And it was the only way, apparently, that they could afford to pay for the funerals. And it just beggars belief nowadays. You can't even turn the telly on. You turn the telly on and it'll give you a warning about everything. Even if you're watching the news, it says, well, we're going over to an earthquake now. Warning, some scenes might be distressing. Do we have to be told? We know it's going to be distressing. You're looking at people who have just gone through one of the worst natural disasters you can imagine, and they say it might be distressing. You turn on a program and it says, oh, there's scenes of people drinking. Scenes of people drinking? Of course there's scenes of people drinking. It's the Sweeney. They don't have cups of tea. They have whiskey all the time. It's ridiculous. But these people are laying out actual dead bodies. You're physically seeing a dead body there and paying for the privilege of seeing presumably bloated dead bodies, which have been killed in a disaster. It just beggars belief in this day and age that would happen. Anyway, of course, there has to be an inquest, right? So they have an inquest, right? Now, to get on a jury, you are not going to be a poor person. I would think that there is some there's some property owning or fiscal rules that you had to earn so much or be worth so much to get on a jury. They're not going to pick out a porter from Billingsgate and say you can sit on there. I may be wrong, but we're talking about 1814 where people knew their place. Right. And you had to be middle class to be on one of these juries. You couldn't just come out. You couldn't be Nobby Clark from Spitalfields and just be stuck up there. So they have this inquest. The coroner takes the jurors down. I expect they had a free look round the jurors at all the damage done there. and they were told that I think that it was around about £25,000 worth of damage, which is what it cost the brewery as to this, and they're on the verge of bankruptcy. So everyone's worried about the brewery. So the coroner says this was an act of God. Nowadays, that would never happen. They would say, no, that's negligence on the part of the brewery. They knew there was something wrong with that vat. That's it. They've got to face some kind of penalty for that. So that act of God, right, was great for the brewery, but for the families of the deceased, that meant no compensation. Nothing for them. They were the ones who needed the money, not the fellas who owned the brewery. It was the people that were living in these impoverished conditions that needed that money. So the brewery then went to Parliament. Now, in those days, the way the tax on alcohol worked was you paid the tax on alcohol you were brewing. So you didn't pay it like you do, you pay the excise duty nowadays on what is sold. You pay while you're making it. So if they want to make 1 million litres of best bitter, they've got to pay the excise duty on that best bitter. So it's paid at the point of production as opposed to the point of sale. And they went to Parliament and they said, look, we never got the benefit of this. The coroner said it's an act of God. It's not our fault, right? Can we have back our excise duty? And Parliament actually voted on this. They haven't got much better things to do. I mean, presumably 1814, I don't know the dates, but they're in a war with France and Napoleon, or about to go into a war with France and Napoleon. And they're worried about giving them back their duty on their beer. But they did. And they gave them £7,000. £7,000. The bereaved families managed to raise £23. £23 from exhibiting the dead bodies of their loved ones. Now, where's the justice in that? Why is Parliament not saying, well, let's give them some money? Right? I'll tell you why Parliament was not saying it. They never had a vote. You had to have property to be eligible to vote in this country in 1814. It wasn't until 1832 when you started to get changes in the voting laws. And then, of course, it wasn't until the 20th century that women were allowed to vote. So those days, Parliament couldn't care less about those people because they didn't have the vote. And even if they did have the vote, the system was so corrupt. I actually visited Old Sarum, which was a place where it changed. And I did do a video on it. I'm sure I've done a video on Old Sarum. I'll have a look for that. Because it's always been a place that fascinated me when I first heard about it, when I first started studying the British Constitution many, many years ago. We're talking about 50 years ago, that Old Sarum came up, and that was the catalyst in getting the voting changed. But that's another subject. It's another tangent. I've just gone on, and I'll go off on another tangent because now the site of the brewery is actually the Dominion Theatre in Tottenham Court Road. So if you may have travelled from across the road, if you live across the road, you know where the Dominion is. You might have travelled across the world and come down and visited the Dominion. I've been there a couple of times. I've been there to see David Bowie a few times when he's performed there. And I tell you what, I've got some great stories about the Dominion. That is a video on its own. So I won't go into too much of that. But yeah, I said in another video about the stunts that I pull and get into places where I shouldn't be. The Dominion is one of those places, and the time I did it at the Dominion, I actually had a little disposable camera with me. I always carried these disposable cameras after a while because I get into places, people say that's a load of rubbish, but then I get my picture taken there. And if I have a disposable camera, if I lose it or if security take it off me, then it doesn't matter. Little cardboard things they were, but I still got the photographs somewhere. But I'll perhaps do something on if not only on the Dominion, but on all those other things. But coming back, the Great Beer Flood is not as funny as it sounds because 8 people were killed. All of those 8 people were poor people, so their families suffered greatly. They had to raise money by showing tourists. People came literally to see dead bodies. They had to raise money for their funerals for that, and Parliament felt so sorry for the brewery, it gave them £7,000 back. What I would do is I would say, Parliament, once again, you were in the wrong. You looked after the wrong people. The people that needed it were the poor people who lost people in those families. I don't know. They might have lost the breadwinner in the family. I don't know the actual the actual people who died, but they might have lost the breadwinner. But of course, it's always, it's like that old saying, isn't it, from the musical song? It's the rich what get the pleasure and the poor what gets the blame. Now, this is not a political standing. It's just common sense, isn't it? You look after the most vulnerable people in society. You do not keep them downtrodden. You look after them. And if you don't, history has shown in other countries what happens when you don't look after the people at the bottom and you treat them like dirt. So anyway, that's another story. I just feel sorry for those people. And of course, what about all the damage to their properties? They didn't own those properties. So landlords, would they have rebuilt them to the same standard? Would they have repaired them? I doubt it very much. So they lived in even worse conditions and stunk of beer for the next 5 years. I mean, these buildings were wooden. You imagine all that beer going into it. So you had the stench. You know, and even these places stank anyway because there was no sanitation, absolutely no sanitation, and the disease around there was absolutely widespread. And yeah, I was watching something on a fella called Jon Snow the other day who was he put in a pump in Soho, but once again, that's another story. I'm terrible going off on tangents, but the bottom line is that the Great Beer Flood was not as funny as it first seems. I probably would not have been rushing around trying to get a bucket so that I could get a few pints to drink later on in the evening. I probably would have been running for my life like the other people that was there. Anyway, that's the Great Beer Flood. If you've enjoyed this, a thumbs up would be absolutely great. Would really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And if you want to hear what's going on, subscribe to the channel, please do. It all helps. But I will. I was going to incorporate this with another story of beer, going back to the 19th century. But I think this one will probably drag on too long. As usual, I just ramble on and on and on. I mean, that's the idea of it, to give the people who I meet in the pub a chance to catch their breath instead of standing there listening to me rambling on. I've got it out my system by doing it to the video. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I honestly do appreciate it. And I'll see you next time with another story.